And welcome into the Fantasy 4-Packs annual draft tips and, well, I guess kind of in-season tips also. But just tips and tricks to help you win your draft and league. I'm your host, Ian Power, joined, as always, by Frankie Santiago and Matthew Vitale. We've prepared a list of 10 tips today for you guys. A little different from last year, cut some of the ones that seemed sort of fluffy or year-specific, added in some new ones. Hopefully going to give you guys some good knowledge that you can take into your drafts. This isn't going to be, draft this player, don't draft this player. This is more general purpose knowledge to help you approach the draft with the right mindset, we'll say.
Stuff new drafters should know if this is one of your
even stuff that old drafters should know they might not consider or might have forgot about.
Stuff that, if you're in a certain trend or you're in a rut and trying to figure out what you can do to bounce back, this is just some stuff that might help you if you're, getting ready.
No, absolutely. As always, before we get into it, go ahead and follow us on social media. You can see our socials all over the screen here. Subscribe to us on YouTube. Hit that notification bell. We are doing 2 episodes a week throughout the month of August. So if you slap that bell, you get to know exactly when our new episodes drop. And if you have any questions, issues, concerns, anything like that, feel free to reach out to us on Twitter at our socials. That's the best spot to reach us, or leave us comments under the videos. Little bit of news today before we get into the draft tips.
Sure.
Kenny G is down with a hamstring.
I'm very shocked and surprised.
Yes, he's never had soft tissue injuries in his life.
Nope.
Anyway, at least for this one, the team doctors are optimistic it's not too serious. Sounds like it's going to be a rest and rehab sort of situation. He should be ready to go for the start of the season. I don't love it because anytime you get a hamstring, it stands to reason they could crop up later on in the season. These are kind of injuries that don't really go away without a fair amount of rest. Maybe if it's non-serious enough, a month until the season starts is good to get him up and running. But to me, this does lower Kenny a little bit in my expectations for him.
Yeah, or if you're Julio Jones, you could just have the hamstring injury forever.
Yeah. Yes, it never goes away. Dak Prescott, team is taking a conservative approach to his shoulder rehab, which seems to me basically they're saying, we probably should have just pushed him right back out there. I don't really care about this all for Dak. I think that if it was gonna be worse, we would know about it. It sounds like they just don't want to further risk their franchise quarterback in meaningless training camp practices. That offense doesn't need a lot of gelling. With the exception of CeeDee Lamb, they've all been there forever. And CeeDee Lamb looked like he was, stepping right in. He was a natural. So I don't really think this is going to cause them many issues. They should still be able to get into football shape without Dak really doing anything.
Yeah.
Probably the biggest news on this list, Jonathan Taylor is dropping in rankings because Carson Wentz and Quentin Nelson both have foot injuries, and fairly serious foot injuries. I believe actually the same injury timetable of 5 to 12 weeks.
Yeah, it's almost the same. I saw Frank Reich. He was actually talking on Pat McAfee's podcast, or show, whatever you want to call it. And apparently this is an injury that goes back to Carson Wentz's high school football days.
I saw that he broke a foot back in his high school, or broke a bone in his foot back in his high school days, and
yeah, so they're feeling optimistic that they should be able to get these guys together. Quentin Nelson has a great outlook on this one. So he's definitely pushing for that 5 week as opposed to the 12. So he seems like he's going to be getting himself out there sooner rather than later, which is what you like to see for a guy who's going to be protecting the quarterback and helping open holes for Jonathan Taylor.
It's good that we're going to have the yin and yang on this, because on one hand we're going to have Quentin Nelson coming back right at the 5 week mark, and then we're going to have Carson Wentz coming back right at the 12 week mark.
Yeah,
it's the old push and pull. I think that's. It's good that he's going to try and come back quick. Obviously, it's bad if he rushes back and gets hurt again. But even if he gets back at the 5 week mark, that still means that you're missing, 2 weeks of the season? Or Jonathan Taylor's still missing 2 weeks of the season without his best offensive lineman. I mean, you kind of got to downgrade him at least a little bit now. I moved him down below Austin Eckler and Aaron Jones on my list because I still love the talent, but missing his quarterback and best offensive lineman I think there's safer guys in the first round now.
Yeah, and as we'll touch on in our tips, there's a reason why you have to push him down your rankings. Just because he's still going to be there for the majority of the season, but he's going to be missing some important time in the fantasy season.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously, this stands to reason that it could be re-injured in season, which further raises Taylor's risk a little bit.
Yeah.
Devonta Smith, hopefully standout rookie, is going to have to wait a little bit longer to stand out because he has already sprained his MCL.
In a very Eagles fashion.
I don't know if they interview these players listen, have you had secret injury issues in the past? How many injuries do you think you could have before your rookie contract is up? Do these players get paid on a injury basis opposed to a playoffs made basis or a plays made basis? Is there something we're not seeing here?
No, I think they got their team doctors getting paid by injuries repairs. So
sure.
He's like, I kind of got a bruise on my knee. He's like, nope, that's a sprained MCL. I'll put that back together. Don't you worry.
Tanya Harding, MD, back there, just hitting the players in the knee with a lead pipe.
They're making so much money.
Yeah, it's... I mean, I guess if there's anything to take away from this, it's that we're probably going to end up being right about Devonta Smith, and that if he's already getting hurt in training camp, it doesn't speak well to his ability to hold up at an NFL level given his size.
Yeah.
And then finally, we didn't touch on it last episode, but Nick Chubb got paid.
Yes, he did.
He got a 3-year contract extension, $20 million guaranteed. Glad to see that Cleveland's taking care of their bell cow back. I think that can only mean good things for Nick Chubb this season. If they and for the future. If they didn't want to, if they didn't want to have Nick Chubb be a focal point of their offense, they could have just let him walk. Instead, They made him at least one of the most guaranteed money for running backs in football.
Yeah. And I think this is a lot better to the contracts than we've seen in recent years. I feel like they paid him in a way that it's not going to cripple the team or tie them up too much.
Yeah.
But,
No, it was a shorter deal.
Yeah, shorter deal. The money is a little bit more where I think a running back should be paid at the elite level.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I mean, and it seemed like there was some cooperation going both ways there, where Nick Chubb wasn't trying to bend him over a barrel, and they were just trying to make sure that he got a fair payday. So, Bravo, Cleveland Browns. Not only are you turning around play on the field, but you're turning around play off the field. All right. Well, that's all the news I had. Did you? Matthew Stafford had a thumb contusion. Apparently, he bashed his thumb against the helmet of another player, but he was back in practice. No issues. Sounds like it's just a bruise.
Yeah.
No, we're not worried about that one at all.
Nope.
Do you guys have any news that I didn't bring up?
No. I'm good to roll.
Okay, let's dive into this episode here. I will lead us off. So, like I said, we've prepared a list of 10 different tips that we think can help you all better prepare for your drafts this year. And the first one, and the most obvious one that we always harp on this show, is to know the league, know the people you're drafting with, know the league settings. As much research as you can do, or as much knowledge you can gain about the league format, and if it's an in-person draft, where the draft is being held, the people you're drafting with, all of that can only hit, and it seems obvious, but the amount of people that don't do it, it's staggering. It can only help you be a better drafter. Knowing offhand, what your league scoring format is, means that you don't have to go scrambling for how many points per reception it is, or what the defensive scoring is, or are QBs 6 points or 4 points for a touchdown, when you're trying to decide between two different players at two different positions, or knowing what your league tendencies are, if these are people you've drafted with for years, can allow you to maybe you're sitting at the 9 pick and you've got a guy that you're waiting on, and that the guys in between really hate Aaron Jones, so you feel like you can get him in the second round. You can sort of use that to your advantage. I would even go as far to say, as part of Know Your League, talk to your league mates if it is a new league. Try and make friends with some of them, not just for the purpose of exploiting them, because you also should just be friends with people in your league, but also to exploit them, because if you can learn how they think, what player, maybe through talking you find out players they like, players they don't like. That's information you can use in the draft. If your league allows draft pick trading, you can use that to sell a pick to someone. Maybe there's a player falling, and someone really wants Kenny Golladay or something, and he's falling to your pick, and you don't care about him. Trade that pick to the person who really wants Kenny, and then just take the player you wanted 3 picks later.
Yeah, I mean, it's especially when you're coming into a new league where, you can know the ADPs frontward, backwards, sideways, where you don't have to worry about the standard. Like, if nope, standard's going, like, yep, I know all that ADP.
Yeah.
That's great. But when Jack from accounting is a huge, Steelers homer, and Najee Harris, who's been going in the second, top of the third, all of a sudden goes in the first, you got to be ready for that change in a draft where it's, that's a common thing that happens. People know that, anyone can, like, draft in the top. And, everyone knows CMC is like the number one guy right behind Dalvin. But when you get to the second round, if there's a guy who just doesn't do his research, you got to know he's kind of a loose cannon. He might just pull up and be like, I'll take Juju here because I remember he was good. In the second, you're like,
sure.
I was not ready for Juju.
Yeah, there's always draft surprises. And knowing your league helps you better prepare for those surprises.
Yep.
Yeah, I think it's like, it's not just knowing the intelligence level or savviness, rather, of the other people in your league. It's also knowing things like, oh, is it, online, offline? Are you going to be doing it at someone's house?
Right. That's what I was talking about when I was saying, understand your draft location. If it's online, show up to the lobby early, be ready. Test your internet connection, make sure that that's all working out properly. If it's offline, print out your sheets. You want to have your cheat sheets on hand, so you're not trying to memorize it while you're knocking back beers mid draft.
Yeah. Is there drinking during the draft? Because I know. At least a couple of years.
It's fantasy football. Of course, it's how much drinking is there during the draft.
At least a couple of years with our league, some people, we won't name names, have gotten a little bit too sauced and made questionable picks.
Yep.
Kelvin Benjamin when he tore his ACL.
Who was also being drafted by the same player who drafted Jordy Nelson the same year he tore his ACL.
All right, Vitaly, take us away with number 2.
Number 2 is draft for value. So this is an all-encompassing for pick one all the way down. When you're going through, you might have a target in mind, and you're like, okay, as I was talking about Najee Harris, usually he goes in the second, third. But as you saw with our mock draft, and what could just happen, like maybe you just have a lot of people in your league that don't like Steelers, and they think that Ben's washed, the line's not good, and they're all just like, you know what, I'll pass on Najee, let someone else have him. Now you're sitting there, maybe you're at the top of the fourth, and all of a sudden Najee Harris is staring at you. It's like now he's too good of a value, and even for players that we don't like, a couple exclusions, but when we're talking about a player that we think is a bust or a player we don't like, it's because the value where they're sitting doesn't make sense for you to draft them there. So, good example, Kyle Pitts. When we were doing our draft, 4th round, crazy, way too expensive to pay for a tight end. But in the 8th round, where you already have most of your team slotted out, he becomes a lot more of a value. So now you're putting value into your team that can help you win, as opposed to overreaching and not getting the ceiling that you need to get in the 4th round to have a well-rounded team.
Sure, it's kind of what you were saying earlier. You were saying fall in like with players, don't fall in love with them, or don't hate players so much that you'll never draft them. There should be a very short list of undraftable players.
Yeah, like for us, we talk about Tyler Lockett up ways.
Does it say Tyler Lockett on the list?
Yeah,
I will never draft him.
12th round.
Never. Because then he ends up in my starting lineup, and then I have to guess which weeks he's good.
Fair.
I will let him be a landmine on someone else's team.
Right. So it's like I said, it's the same thing in the fall in love, especially because say like I don't know, you were last year you had CMC, he was more of a fall in hate, but if you were the guy who owned CMC when he exploded, but yet there was didn't look at the usage, didn't look at that. Like you have to look at a player in a totality. Look at the negatives that they bring to your team versus the positives. Does it make sense to take them here? Are you overreaching on the player? Are you unfairly judging this player because he was getting banged up in a season where he was getting just unlucky?
Vitaly, if you tell me to not draft Nick Chubb in the top 5 picks this year, I will come across this table and punch you square in your face.
He still does have one of the best running backs right behind him.
I will fight you on podcast. Nick Chubb is the exception on the like don't love for me.
Yeah, like I said,
he's not love, he's super love.
That's why these are called tips and not demands.
All right, Frankie, what's your first tip here?
So this is something that I preach to everyone. Always be mock drafting.
We do try and preach that on this show.
Basically from middle of July until.
And this is going to tie into one of your later points, too.
Yeah. End of August, just if you don't know what pick you have, or even if you do know what pick you have, experiment with every single slot on the draft. Because what's going to happen is, say cool, you want to just focus on that. awesome, great. You're gonna have a pretty rough idea or a pretty good idea of what your team's gonna look like at the end of everything. But what drafting from other positions allows you to do is let you look at what other teams can possibly look like, and then from that you can get the knowledge of, okay, these guys are probably going to fall to this position. I should, I can plan around that. You can see what running backs are going to fall deeper. You can see what wide receivers are going to fall deeper. And it's just, they're very easy to do. Fantasy Pros, Sleeper, sites like that, they all have...
Those are probably the two best mock draft platforms at the moment.
And you can get a mock draft done in like 20... If you're doing it alone, you can get it done in like 10 minutes.
Like, actually, and I love what Sleeper's been doing with their mock draft platform, but I think Fantasy Pros is still the best, the far and away best there, because they have, the custom cheat sheets, they have the pick predictor, they have the almost like sort of like pseudo programmable AI, so you can set league preferences. You can really try and simulate your draft with as much minutia as you want to add in with them. They are a excellent platform to go through if you're really trying to get into the weeds of mock drafting.
Yeah, and I know there's a couple of programs out there that can help you in draft and pre-draft. I use a couple different ones where I can actually go through and edit a profile. Like, all right, Ian has a huge love for Nick Chubb, so I can just boost Nick Chubb's ADP for specifically Ian's team. So that way when I'm going through and all of a sudden he's at the 6th pick and Nick Chubb's sitting there, he's gone almost every single time.
I'm not saying he's my 1-1, but he's probably my 1-3.
Right. So you can go through
after Dalvin and Christian McCaffrey. I'm not insane.
So it's a nice little phone app that I use. I'll go through and I'll edit and I'll put players they love, hate, players that I've seen them draft a lot, and I'll kind of mess with rankings there. So then I can do a mock draft from my draft position for our main league.
Is this Draft Dominator?
This is Draft Dominator. So I've used it kind of year in, year out. You can heavily tinker. So basically, they'll give you here's our ADP. I'm like, all right, cool. Here's what I think it is. Here's what I think you think it is. Here's what I think you think it is. And I go through and I'll just am I taking a break at work? I got 15 minutes. I'll bang out the first 4 rounds just to see what those look like. I'm like, okay. Ian keeps taking Nick Chubb into Austin Eckler. If I want Austin Eckler, maybe I have to do some.
You're giving away my draft strategy.
So I can expect if I'm drafting behind him in the second round, I'm like, all right, plan for not having Austin Eckler or plan to trade.
Yeah. I think one other thing I want to add on to always be mock drafting too is that if you do, throwing back to number 1, if you do know your league and you know how people in your league draft, if you know your draft order already, try and draft from other people's positions and draft like you know how they draft. Like, put yourself in the mind of your league mates, draft like them, see what they would take in those spots so you can try and better plan for players going off the board. Try different draft styles too. Mm-hmm. Even if you are looking at this year's draft and you're like, you know what, I want to go 3 running backs in a row. The best about mock drafts is at the end of the mock draft, if you don't like it, you press delete and it's gone forever.
Yep.
So try drafting an early quarterback. Try drafting an early tight end. Try going heavy wide receiver. I would never go 0 running back. Like, try going heavy wide receiver. Try going heavy running back. See how your team looks with all these different draft styles, because that way you actually that way you're not hypothesizing. You actually know what your team looks like at that point, if that comes up during your actual draft.
Yeah. Don't wait for us to do that on Mondays. Also, check out the last video if you haven't. It's gonna be right up here.
Yes. Speaking of mock drafts, we just did our standard mock draft.
Mock draft Monday every week in August.
All right, jumping back to me here, keeping with the draft theme. Ignore ADP, folks. That sounds dumb, but bear with me.
Bold statement.
Ignore ADP. ADP is an outdated concept from the earlier days of fantasy football, and you're starting to hear tier-based drafting more and more, but it hasn't really become the mainstream yet, I would say. It's, it might seem it if you're heavily into fantasy football, but the average Joe out there is just pulling up ESPN top 300 and going off of the ADP.
Yep.
ADP is a trap. It is a trap that baits less informed people into picking players that don't necessarily need to be picked because they feel like this player is the top player on the board and everyone else is picking this player, so why shouldn't I pick this player? And I don't generally mean ignore ADP to the extent that you shouldn't be taking Kyler Murray in the first round no matter how much you love Kyler Murray. But if you're looking at the first round and you've done your research and you've set up your tiers, and let's say tier 1 is Christian McCaffrey and Dalvin and Alvin Kamara, and you're at pick 5, and all 3 of them go off the board. ADP here says that you probably pick Saquon Barkley or Derrick Henry. Maybe you don't like either of those. Maybe you think that Saquon's going to have a slow start to the season because he is, and Derrick Henry is an injury risk because he's had an ungodly amount of carries over the past 2 years because he is. Maybe your tiers don't reflect them being the top guys, and you instead pick up Zeke, or you pick up Nick Chubb, or you pick up Jonathan Taylor if he's still high on your list for some reason. But like the idea here is that you're using your own knowledge and your own tiers to formulate decisions on what players should be taken where. You're not just being a slave to the 12.7 next to a player's number and being like, well, I'm picked 12, they're 12.7. Guess I'm picking Tyreek Hill here.
Yeah.
It'll help you gain an advantage over your league mates who are just using ADP, because you can slightly reach on players that they aren't expecting you to reach on. And once again, going back to knowing your league, if you know that there are some people who aren't good at thinking on their feet, and you're grabbing players that they're not expecting to grab, that can completely mess up someone's draft style. And now you are sitting in the driver's seat because you're the one picking players out of order as the rest of the league perceives it, which can set you up for fantasy success and set them up for fantasy disappointment.
Yeah, I think this strategy is extra important if you're picking on the ends. If you're pick 1 or 2 or 12.
Oh, it's mandatory on the ends.
Yeah, because you figure there's so many players that are going to go off the board between your picks that if you're trying to play the ADP game there and you're like, oh, well, he should fall to me. It's like, no, if you're sitting there and let's say you love Joe Mixon and you're at the 12th pick.
So I actually have an example from today. I did a best ball draft today, the puppy 2 on Underdog. And I was drafting out of the 11 spot, and it was in the 6th round, I believe. And I was looking at ADP, and Russell Gage should have been there at my next pick, but it was close. So I took him about 20 picks early. Because I didn't believe that I didn't know for certain Russell Gage was still going to be there in 20 picks, and I didn't feel like risking it for the biscuit and finding out, so I just grabbed him. I believed he was the best wide receiver on the board at that time and locked him up.
Yeah, like when you're looking at almost 20 players coming off the board between you and your next pick,
it's incredibly hard to predict.
It's so hard to predict, especially as you get later in rounds where people aren't as sure and like.
It's hard to predict 12.
Yeah, so when you're looking at it, it's just take the guys that you want right there, like the guys who are in that area in your tier. Like use your tier rankings and grab those 2 guys so you so you don't miss out on them because you wanted to get cute and play ADP.
Another way to think about this is it's listen to your gut. If you have a gut feeling on a player, or if your research says a player is supposed to go here, but they're actually going here, just take them anyway. At least then you're not going to be beating yourself up because you missed them.
Yep.
Yeah, as far as ADP goes, it's average draft position, and it's players' ADP is going to change, or maybe not throughout the preseason.
All ADP changes at the preseason, but because it's such a large aggregate, the data's wrong by the end of the month.
Well, yeah, and it's also, it grows as the preseason goes on. So it's like somebody who was, higher up who has an injury later in the preseason, their ADP might not be accurately reflected in, drafts that are going to be on the earlier side. Like some people are going to draft next week. Some people are, for some reason,
are drafting right now.
That was some people are drafting now.
It is August. Drafts are happening.
Yeah, and we still see, as we said today, players getting injured, and their ADP is going to drop, which is why, completely different point, but I like drafting closer to September rather than later.
Yeah. Sure, but that's a separate point entirely. That doesn't have anything to do with draft tips. That's just that's just making sure you have all of the knowledge you can possibly have when your draft happens. Yep. All right, Vitaly, what's your second point here?
So, runs. What they mean in fantasy football is
the ones that aren't in your shorts, instead they're on the draft board.
Well, if you follow the runs,
that's gross.
You might get the runs because you'll be running scared of your league. Because if you're
nice
the
segue,
person,
I like it.
Yeah,
tie it all together.
If you're the person, so good example, quarterback. A lot of times people have been preaching, and I still feel this way. Wait on quarterback. Don't overpay because you can get similar value in the later rounds, especially with guys like Aaron Rodgers and Tom Brady sitting so late in drafts. So
Aaron Rodgers has actually been coming up a little bit. Now it's Stafford, Burrow, and Brady that are still just hanging down there around the 10.
So those guys, you're targeting them for a late draft, and let's say just Mahomes is gone.
And Tannehill, obviously.
And we're in like the 5th round. And then all of a sudden the guy who starts the 5th goes Josh Allen. And then right behind him, Lamar Jackson. And then Kyler Murray. And then it's like boom, 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 boom. And then the guy after them is like, well, they're all going right now. I don't want to miss out because I want to get this guy here.
Yeah.
And then he takes a quarterback. And now you're just looking at just a whole line of quarterbacks going, and you're the 7th guy in that line, don't reach and be like, well, I got to get Brady now because this is when quarterbacks go. It's like, no. Try and be averse and take advantage of the value that your league is handing you. If you're the 8th guy in that run and everyone's taking quarterbacks, that means the guy who was supposed to go at the top of the 5th, a David Montgomery, a something, just slid.
Yeah, Cooper Kupp.
Yeah, they're just sliding.
Mark Andrews, T.J. Hawkinson.
Don't look at his runs. Look at it as a water slide of value. Just shooting these players down to you. And I understand it's going to be scary to watch, and you might end up losing on a player you want because somebody in front of you got, chicken and jumped into the run and took a guy way too early. But that's why with what Frankie's going to talk about is just don't give up on your draft. Make sure you're sticking with it and drafting for value. So there's times where it's not as applicable, like the first round. A lot of running backs are going to go. Don't just because I'm telling you don't to avoid runs, don't be like, oh, well, he said don't do that, and I'm at pick 6. I have to take Davante Adams. It's like, no, it's fine.
That was actually the one exception that I was going to say is if you want to follow the running back run in the first round, I think it's still worth it because you're still getting an elite running back if you're picking at 9. Right,
but then you can see in the second round where people keep going running back deep, and third round running backs start coming up into the second. You're like, do I want to take CEH right now? Like, I like him, but I don't middle of the second round like him. But that's kind of just a whole thing. Do not be the end of the run, or if anything, start the run. If you see it, like I said, if Josh Allen's sitting in the 5th, you can scare the rest of your league by starting the quarterback run.
Yeah, if you are going to join a run, you want to be in the top 3 people in that run. Otherwise you're chasing.
Yeah,
you're chasing. You're not leading. Frankie, what about your second point here? Something about being a flexible drafter.
So to speak to a couple of the earlier points that were made. Actually, this one the last one kind of ties in really well. Yeah. Is with the chasing of runs. I mean, players are going to slide down, and you don't want to be the guy who's going to, just if a player that you want later gets picked earlier. You should be able to, adapt to that. You should be able to, have it. You shouldn't be caught off guard. You should have a plan in place.
You're going to be caught off guard. Well, in nature of fantasy drafts is that things are going to happen that you don't expect. This is just being more prepared about being caught off guard.
And the way to be more prepared is, as you touched on a little bit earlier, is not only drafting from multiple positions in the mock draft, but also just trying different strategies. If you see, again, last episode, I got Najee Harris in the 3rd. I wasn't planning for him to be there in the 3rd, but I looked at, the way the board was, picked him up, and then I kind of slotted my wide receivers down.
I think a better way because obviously if a great running back falls, no one's ever going to not take a good running back unless you already have 3 or 4. But a better way to go is if Mahomes, who usually has an ADP in the 3rd round, falls into the 5th, don't look a gift horse in the mouth. You lock up Mahomes. Or if, Robert Woods, who's usually going in the 4th round, is still kicking around in the 6th because no one really wants to take Robert Woods because he's a boring name, you take the value. Yeah. You have to, or if you were planning on drafting a quarterback in the 5th, but you have the 8th pick in the 5th round, and there was a run on quarterbacks before you went off the board, or before you went on the board, and suddenly those quarterbacks aren't there, and now you're pivoting to a different draft strategy because if you're drafting a quarterback in the 5th and 7 just went off the board, you're drafting Jalen Hurts. Yeah. That's really the better way to think about this here. Is to not tie yourself down to any one static way of thinking.
Yeah, because I said my example was going to be similar to the quarterback one, but we know that running back has been a popular strategy this season, and if you're the guy who is watching that run on, you get your running back in the 1st round, maybe you're pick 5, and you watch it come around and it keeps going running back, and let's just say somehow Davante Adams is staring at you in the thing.
Oh, you mean like what happened to my brother last year?
Exactly. So you could be in the middle of the second staring at one of the best wide receivers, and it's because someone said, I want to go running back Travis Kelce. So they did that, but everyone else was like, I need running backs. So the running back pool's dry, but you're staring at one of the best wide receivers. Don't be like, well, I need to get my running backs. Let me just pass on Davante Adams.
Sure. All right, so for my next point here, and you guys are going to notice at the end, because I started, I'm going to have one extra point. But my next point here is I think one of the more important ones on this list, because it ultimately is going to really help you gain an early advantage, and getting ahead early in fantasy football is huge, because then when the week 4, week 5 comes around, then you're in a position to trade for people as opposed to be trading away people to try and generate wins. Mm-hmm. And this point is draft for early W's and don't give up on your season. And it's a 2-pointer, but the drafting for early W's, and we talked about it a little bit earlier with the the points about Jonathan Taylor and Saquon Barkley about how they're both going to be slow starters. That's a big reason why I've moved them down pretty significantly on my running back rankings, because when I'm looking at running backs in the first round, I'm ideally not targeting guys, or really any first round player. I'm not targeting guys that aren't going to be able to immediately put me in a position to compete. If I think that Saquon Barkley or Jonathan Taylor's going to get off to a slow start because of either injuries or missing players around them, and Aaron Jones is still on the board, I'm just going to go take Aaron Jones, because you want to be the guy that's in the driver's seat at all points during the season. If you are reacting as opposed to being the one that is causing people to react, if you're being reactive as opposed to proactive, mm-hmm. that's bad, and that means that you are likely going to get taken advantage of in a trade, because the people who are winning can see that your team's hurting. They'll try and trade you a short-term olive branch to get you some wins. But you want to be able to be putting a team on the field in the first couple weeks that just goes out there and just blows doors. Because if you do that, you're going to be setting yourself, obviously also like the magic number to win. I guess it goes up by a game now, yeah. But
it's probably about 8 now.
Yeah, it's the magic number to get into the playoffs is roughly 8. We'll call it 8.5 maybe. If you can start the season 3-1 or 4-0, you're halfway to the playoffs at that point already. That lowers the bar for what you have to do over the rest of the season significantly. Yeah. You can start doing one of my favorite things, which is trading for players on their bye, which is one of the best ways to get good players off of other teams. Is you go to a team who can't really afford to take a loss and say, "Hey man, I see you got Patrick Mahomes on a bye this week and you don't really have bench space. I'll take him off your hands. Here's Ryan Tannehill." And suddenly you have Patrick Mahomes, and they maybe get a win out of it. You lose Mahomes bye week, but now you have Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah,
and a difference maker at the position. It is a very important thing to be able to do. And if you fail at doing this, because obviously it's fantasy football and the best laid plans, et cetera, that's where never give up comes in. You don't want to be the player who's 1-5 through 6 weeks and you just throw in the towel and just check it once a week to set your lineup and call it a day. Because there are quite a few people who do that. And if you are, instead of that, if you are the person who's constantly fighting to get back in, if you're constantly making trades to get back into the race of it, you at least are in a better position than the other people in your league who are giving up. And then there's always going to be those 1 or 2 people in your league who got lucky in the first couple weeks. Their players are scoring above their expected points totals, and they're going to come back to earth. Like if you keep fighting to try and get back into it, make good waiver wire picks, make some savvy trades to turn some losses into wins. Try and set yourself up well so you don't get hit by bye week hell. All of these things, you can do that to parlay yourself back into the playoffs. Then once you get into the playoffs, it's anyone's game. Yeah. Obviously, you might not be in as good a position as some of the juggernaut teams, but I mean, as we saw this past year in our personal league, the 2 juggernaut teams lost.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing that with this one kind of rolling.
Yeah, take a drink over there, Frankie.
I'm just saying, someone sold hard, but.
Anyways, so I think another point you can really roll into this one is be realistic about your team. Whether positive or negative, because you could be the guy.
Yeah, don't only smell roses.
It feels like every year, whoever the number 2 scoring team is, that's the team that's always fighting to get into the playoffs, tooth and nail, because every week they catch somebody who's like, "Did you see Alvin Kamara score 6 touchdowns?" It's like, "Yeah, I did against me." It's like, and then your team was still amazing, but if you're the number 2 scorer and you verse the number 1, you still lose.
I mean, a sidebar to that is why all leagues should do median scoring, because if you do median scoring, you're at least getting half a win for that.
Yeah, I'm definitely for that mode. It's got to popularize a little bit, so probably in a few years we'll be talking about that the same way we talk about half point PPR.
Sure.
So if you're that team, you understand that, yeah, my record is 1-4, but I have been just getting my teeth kicked in every week while fighting back well? Or
Yeah.
are you the guy who's like, I had Cooper Kupp that year where he was just dominating the league until he cooled off in the back half of the
You
year?
mean when he got hurt?
Yeah. Cooled off. How dare you play bad?
When he was the number 2 wide receiver until I believe he tore his ACL that year.
Something like that. Anyways.
I remember because he was on my team that year. He was the number 2 wide receiver in football, and I was just ecstatic because I love Cooper Kupp, and then he just...
Yeah. So a little bit less his example, but if you understand that a player is firing way above their pay grade, way out kicking their coverage, that's now a trade chip. You're like, I'm
like a Tyler Lockett or a Sammy Watkins.
There you go. You're 5-0, and you're like, Tyler Lockett is not going to keep up putting up 25-point games. He is not the wide receiver 1. Here you go, team that's losing. I will take your player, Jonathan Taylor, who's been poor because his lineman and his quarterback are back.
Sure. Vitaly, what's your next point here? We're on to number 8.
Number 8. So this is something I've regularly talked about. I'm usually kind of the grouch when it comes to rookies, and it's know their value. Do not overdraft them. I love Mr. Justin Jefferson, who's hanging up right behind me.
I don't want to talk about it.
He's a great player in this league.
Hey,
whoever would drop him in week 3 must be an idiot.
Could you tell me where he was going in drafts last year?
Basically wasn't.
Yeah. Oh, really?
Yeah.
Undrafted, you say?
Yeah.
Yes.
So,
Hey, where did that James Robinson guy go?
Undrafted.
Ah.
So
Hey, what about T. Higgins?
basically undrafted. So when you look at these players, last year I want to call it the anomaly. I can be wrong because the NFL game is evolving. Players are getting better year after year. Like, we're in a more throwing league than we ever saw. So rookie wide receivers could definitely break out a little more than they used to, where it was just like you saw a little Beckham break out and you're like, wait, a rookie can do that in their first season? Mike Evans did what? Like, those guys were anomalies. It was like a 10% hit rate on rookie receivers returning like a top 2, like wide receiver 2 value. So now that we've seen Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, T. Higgins, all these guys that were like just salivating to get.
I mean, even to a lesser extent, Brandon Ayuk and Michael Pittman and guys like that who still had like traditionally very good rookie wide receiver seasons.
Yeah.
They just look bad compared to their counterparts. This past year.
Yeah, quality receivers used to be golf clap, just very respectable.
Like, you turned in a couple good games down the stretch and maybe won someone a title, but for the balance of the season, you were unusable.
Exactly. So I want until I have a long-term amount of stats that show that this is no longer the trend, I'm going to keep drafting rookies like they have a very I'll give them the higher ceiling.
So
now.
you are not in on Jamar Chase this year, then?
I am not.
Did you know he has a 5th-round ADP ahead of T. Higgins?
I hate that because you know what? I'd rather go and find the next T. Higgins who's going to go for free and get him.
Last time I checked, he was going 1 pick ahead of T. Higgins.
Yeah, like you can go out and just get you can go shopping with your last pick and just be like, was there a rookie that has a slim chance of breaking out? I'll just take him to see if he does something week 1.
It's Amon-Ra St. Brown.
Yeah, Amon-Ra, the rookie on the Falcons. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. The rookie running back. Like there's guys aplenty that you can find that you don't have to overspend. Why not just take the guy who's been doing it year after year after year after year, as opposed to being like, you know what? Let me take Jamar Chase in the 5th, as opposed to like Julio Jones has been doing it forever.
I think so just to put a bow on this, also to add on to that point,
Yeah.
I think one of the biggest issues with Jamar Chase, just while we're on the subject of him, is that you're drafting him at his ceiling.
Yep.
Because he's not going to end up, or the bell curve says he's not going to end up as a wide receiver 1. So if you're drafting him in the 5th round, you're drafting him to be a wide receiver 2, and that's that is maybe like the 80th percentile up. So like he has more chance of failing than of succeeding, and that's honestly the case for a lot of rookies. Same for Kyle Pitts, same for Javonte Williams and Travis Etienne. All the running backs have better hit rate than wide receivers. Mm-hmm. But like same with Waddle and Devonta Smith. Like all these guys who are going in the single-digit rounds shouldn't be.
Yeah. Like first, and just to bring back to the point I made when we were talking about some stuff, 50% of rookie running backs that are drafted in the first are still busts. So I mean, it's a better percentage than the wide receivers.
Yeah, I think it's on average 2 rookie running backs every year end up as top 24 running backs.
Yeah, it's not a great percentage. It's better, but it's not great.
I mean, that's at least still decent, but that's not ideal.
Like, I have more hope in Najee than I do for Jamar.
Yeah. All right, Frankie, what's your last point here? Number 9.
So, I mean, we've kind of alluded to this through news and through, all of these points, actually, for the most part. Draft safe and be smart about where you're picking your upside.
Sure.
we'll start with the draft safe. I mean,
I've preached risk averse drafting for years.
It's so important.
It's been a huge part of my continued fantasy football success.
Speaking
is just not drafting terrifying players.
Speaking to those, draft for the early W's, the way that you get those early W's is you are smart about where you're drafting your upside, and you're safe. I'm not drafting Saquon Barkley, or I'm going to try everything in my power not to draft Saquon Barkley.
Well, so everyone wants the explosive player, but what's better than Antonio Gibson, who could blow up in your face? Aaron Jones, who isn't going to blow up in your face.
Top 5 running back 2 years in a row. It's almost like I called this, but it's not about not taking risk.
You do need risk. Risk wins championships.
Yep. But I guess the weirdest way to put it is safe risk.
So I would say safety gets you to a championship, but risk wins you the championship.
Yes.
Like Robert Woods. We talk about how he's not a really sexy name. Really consistent player. Aaron Jones, same deal.
Yeah, he should really change his name to something like Optimus Prime Woods. That would be much, much better.
But it's like we talk about drafting for upside and drafting smart. This goes back to, if those guys fall to you that are clearly a value where you are, that's so much upside that you're going to get later in your drafts, especially in those, basically any round after the 6th. And even before that.
Sure.
It's so important. I'm going back to it now, but those early W's are so important. And the best way to do that, at least from my standpoint, is from drafting safe and drafting consistency.
Every year, some of the best wide receivers go 3rd and 4th round. Guys like Allen Robinson and Keenan Allen, who just are models of consistency, and just you can basically just write down what they did last year and just copy paste it into their stat line this year. And every year they don't go high any higher than top of the 3rd because they're boring. But there's a point to being boring. If your boring player gets you 15 fantasy points a week, that's huge.
Yeah, it's we said this about David Montgomery for the longest time. If you need 20 points, he's going to get you 10 points. If you need
8 points, he's going to get you 10 points.
It's just so, and that's not to say avoid risk entirely. It's look for your upside.
You need measured risk.
Yeah.
Look for your upside where it's smart, and don't overpay for players that you shouldn't.
Sure.
Right. Yeah, like I said, the only thing just to touch on that is when you're looking at risk, you have to look at what else you have on your team. If you went a little risky, let's say you went risk in the 2nd round, you think Antonio Gibson is that talented. Now you have to measure that risk in the 3rd, 4th round, but be all right, I need David Montgomery, I need a Robert Woods. That way you have the floor.
Yeah.
You need to build the floor before you can build the ceiling, but the ceiling that's the mountaintop right there. Because if you're just all floor, yeah, you're going to score every guy's coming in and getting you 10 points. Well, the guy who won is going to have, 2 points here, 3 points there, 47 points on his quarterback, and you're just like, I can't beat that. He's like, yeah, that's just how that works.
Yeah, I think the only other thing to say about this too is that you have to ideally probably avoid any more than one risky player in the first 4 rounds, because the first 4 rounds are your foundational picks.
Yep.
And just like building a house, if you build the house on a volatile foundation, the house with a concrete foundation as opposed to the house with a paper mache foundation, one of them is going to be cheaper and could save you a lot of money. It could work out really well if the foundation never gets wet, but if it does, the house falls down.
Yep.
Whereas the concrete foundation, it's going to cost you more, but it's probably good forever, short of a disaster. And you can translate fans if you take the risky players. If you go, Christian McCaffrey into CEH into CD Lamb, and CEH and CD Lamb both have sophomore slumps, and all of a sudden you're like it's hard to come back from that.
Yeah, you better hope that CMC hasn't been slowed down by his injury.
Yeah, it's hard to come back from multiple foundational picks busting on you.
Yeah.
I can attest that from last year when I had Saquon Barkley and Austin Eckler get hurt in what felt like back-to-back weeks.
Yep.
All right, I'm going to wrap this up with my final point. This is one that I really wanted to work into this episode this year because it's one that I've seen players in my leagues. I'm generally in 5 to 6 leagues a year, and I've seen people just bungle this left and right. where they treat their bench spots like the bench spots don't matter. Whereas I argue the bench spots are almost as important as the starter spots. I'm calling this point use every part of the Buffalo, because when you're in your draft, you need to be going into your draft with a plan for what you want to do with your bench. If you're just throwing darts, haven't done any research on the later round players at all, you might as well just not draft players in that range, because they might hit, but they're like, chances are they're going to be garbage, and then you're not going to know what to do with them in season. You want to have a plan for what you want to do with your bench going into the draft. You want to know, okay, I'm drafting Michael Pittman Jr., and I'm drafting Michael Carter, and I'm drafting Amon-Ra St. Brown, or players like that. And if they don't pop in the first 3 weeks, they're off my team to make space for the guys who do pop. Because if you're just drafting guys who just kind of hang around, who just exist, the Corey Davises of the world, where they're going to perform well enough that you don't feel like you can really drop them, but they're not going to do anything for you. They're just they're going to take up a roster spot. Like, you need to be drafting players knowing what your threshold is for dropping them, because otherwise you miss out on the Justin Jeffersons or the T. Higgins or the James Robinsons, because you're too busy fretting about, oh, do I drop Corey Davis this week? Is it okay to keep holding on to Sterling Shepard? These guys who are never going to win you a week, and their floor isn't high enough to warrant being roster floor plays.
Yeah.
I think this is just so important. This isn't just to say that you just have to draft volatile rookies who could pop. You could also use your bench spots, and I don't particularly like this strategy, but I know you're in favor of it. You could also use your bench spots to draft impact veterans who are hurt. Use your bench to hold Michael Thomas. Maybe Saquon Barkley gets hurt going up to the season. He hurt that he's actually going to miss some season time, and suddenly he's falling in drafts. Have an idea for where you would take him, and then he's staying on your bench until he's not, and suddenly he's back and he's Saquon Barkley, and you now have him in addition to everyone else you drafted. That's another way you can use your bench spots. Use them to supplement your already good team by stashing impact veterans who are missing time for one reason. Will Fuller is another great one this year. Missing time from a PED suspension, but when he comes back, he's going to be awesome. He's the best receiver on that team. He was, the wide receiver 8 last season?
Yeah, he was killing it last year.
Yeah, he was really good, and he's been really good. It wasn't just the PEDs. The only thing that stopped him from being amazing in the past was injuries. To put a bow on this once again, just have a plan for those bench spots. Those bench spots matter. If you're just drafting a backup quarterback or a backup tight end or whatever, you're just wasting a spot.
Yeah, because that's actually what I wanted to touch on, was not only can you plan for injured players, plan for pop guys that you're ready to cycle out for the guys who do pop, but if you're going into the strategy of, I'm going to go late quarterback, and you go for Tannehill, if Tannehill doesn't work out, you're going to need another quarterback in there, so you should plan to grab another one. So you don't have to, a guy who might have a great week 2 matchup that you could not be there if you don't draft him. Are you going early tight end? So you have to plan these things. So if you don't want to be the guy who's going late tight end, late quarterback, and late defense, because now that's almost 6 spots you have to use to juggle these positions. Whereas
I advocate for just never drafting more than one tight end or one quarterback, but
right. But the way you do
that, unless there's say Big Ben has 2 great matchups in the first 2 weeks, and Tannehill has 2 great matchups the second 2 weeks, and you're going to be streaming anyways. So you're like, you know what? I'm just going to lock up these 2, going to drop Big Ben week 3 and start Tannehill, and Big Ben gets replaced by some guy off the waiver wire.
Right. But I guess what I'm pointing at is say you're not a huge tight end guy, you still want to go get there's still value in taking a Darren Waller, a Mark Andrews in the middle rounds. So you're like, all right, this spot's locked up. I don't even have to look back.
No. Taking a tight end high is fine. I'm saying doubling up on quarterback or tight end, unless you're in a super flex league, is generally, in my opinion, a waste of a bench spot.
Right. So that's what I'm saying, is that's what brings the value. Plan for your bench. So you said, all right, I'm going late quarterback. There's a good chance there's 2 quarterbacks on my bench, because I want to have this guy, I want to have Burrow, and I want to have Stafford. And if Stafford's too injury prone and just doesn't work, then I've got Burrow there. That's the kind of plan you should have. So if you go too late on all these positions, you can kind of screw yourself.
And just to speak to what you said about thresholds too, it's very important to have those thresholds. And I mean, we're pointing at Justin Jefferson again. I had Justin Jefferson last year in our league, and for the first 2 weeks, he did nothing, and I forget which player it was that got injured, but I was like, okay, I need to pick up somebody else, and Justin Jefferson's not really doing it. So I just dropped him.
I mean, and that's just bad luck. That'll happen sometimes.
And the most important thing is, if it happens during the season, don't let that just bend you out of shape.
You can't let you.
It happens.
Yeah. Sometimes you're going to make a snap judgment on a player because you have to, and it's going to be the wrong call.
Be mad about it for a minute and move on, because if it happens in week 3 like it did to me, you still got the whole rest of the season.
Sure.
Yeah.
And ideally, you drafted well enough at that point too that, losing out on someone like that doesn't cripple your team.
It didn't matter for me until the championship.
Didn't matter until it did.
Yep.
All right, well, that'll do it for our draft tips episode. Join us next week as we bring to you our August episode of our best ball segment. So that'll be leading off the week for us. We're not going to spoil what the non-draft related episode is next week, but it's another good one. Oh, yeah. So join us next week for those. And as always, like I said, if you have any questions, you want to contact us for any reason, reach out to us on Twitter. That is our best way to be contacted. And obviously give the video a like if you appreciated the advice. We appreciate any interaction we get. It helps the channel grow, and if the channel grows, we get to give you guys more videos, more content. More of our time goes to making your fantasy seasons better, which really just helps everyone there.
Yep.
So that'll do it for us. See you guys next week.